This scandal starts with the theft of 18 shillings from a room in the Receiver General Department of the Central Telegraph Office in London on the 4th of July 1889. The accusation of theft by a lowly telegraph boy would lead to a scandal in the royal family, a number of peers, the exile of an aristocrat, possible government interference in the course of justice, and the jailing of the defence solicitor, plus the cover-up finally exposed by the foreign press. This is the vintage scandal of Cleveland Street. There were a series of thefts inside the General Post Office in Fitzrovia in West London, which prompted the London Police and Scotland Yard to investigate staff at the facility. They began with young boys who served as telegraph messengers. 15-year-old Charles Swinskow was searched as part of this investigation. It was a telegraph boy's job to cycle around London, delivering telegrams and urgent messages to homes and businesses. His wage would have been about 11 shillings per week. However, when Swinskow was searched, 18 shillings were found in his pockets, more than a week's salary to such a young man. He was taken in for questioning as part of the police operation. At the time, messenger boys were not permitted to carry any personal cash in the course of their duties, to prevent their own money being mixed with that of the customers. When asked how he came to have such a large sum of money in his possession, Swinskow panicked, admitting that he had earned the money from outside work, and confessed he'd been recruited by someone called Charles Hammond to work at a house in 19 Cleveland Street, which was a male brothel where, for the sum of 4 shillings a time, he would permit the male brothel's clients to have sexual relations with him. He then identified a number of other telegraph boys who were also renting themselves out in this manner at the establishment. According to Swinskow, he was introduced to Hammond by a General Post Office clerk, 18-year-old Henry Newlove. He also named 2 17-year-old telegraph boys who also worked for Hammond, George Wright and Charles Thickbroom. Police Constable Hanks obtained collaborating statements from these two and was able to get a confession from Newlove. His modus operandi was to take the telegraph boys to a lavatory where they would, in police parlance, behave indecently, but his real motive other than sexual pleasure was to induce them to go to Cleveland Street, whose landlord was a Mr. Hammond. The boys would sleep with unknown gentlemen, who left half a sovereign for their services. Hammond would pocket the fee, and give each boy 4 shillings each. Constable Hanks reported the matter to his superiors, and the case was given to Detective Inspector Frederick Aberline. He went to the brothel on the 6th of July with a warrant to arrest Hammond and Newlove for violation of Section 11 of the Criminal Law Amendment Act 1885. The Act made all homosexual acts between men, as well as procurement or attempted procurement for such acts, punishable by up to 2 years' imprisonment, with or without hard labour. He found the house locked and Hammond gone, but Aberline was able to apprehend Newlove at his mother's house in Camden Town. In the time between his statement to Hanks and his arrest, Newlove had gone to Cleveland Street and warned Hammond, who had consequently escaped to his brother's house in Gravesend. On the way to the police station, Newlove started to talk and named Lord Arthur Somerset and Henry Fitzroy, who was the Earl of Euston, as well as a British Army colonel by the name of Gervase, as visitors to Cleveland Street. Somerset was the head of the Prince of Wales stables. Although he was interviewed by police, no immediate action was taken against him, and the authorities were slow to act on the allegations of Somerset's involvement. A watch was placed on the now empty house in Cleveland Street, and details of the case shuffled between government departments. On the 19th of August, An arrest warrant was issued in the name of George Veck, an acquaintance of Hammond's who pretended to be a clergyman. Veck had actually worked at the telegraph office, but had been sacked for improper conduct with the messenger boys. A 17-year-old found in Veck's London lodgings revealed to the police that he had gone to Portsmouth and was returning shortly by train. The police arrested Veck at London's Waterloo Station. In his pockets they discovered letters from someone by the name of Algernon Allies. Abberline sent Constable Hanks to interview Allies at his parents' home in Sudbury. He admitted to receiving money from Somerset, having a sexual relation with him, and working at Cleveland Street for Hammond. On the 22nd of August, police interviewed Somerset for a second time, after which he left for Bad Homburg in Germany, where the Prince of Wales was taking his summer holiday. On the 11th of September, Newlove and Veck were sent for their trial. Their defence was handled by Somerset's solicitor, Arthur Newton. Somerset also paid for all of their legal fees, and by this time had moved on to Hanover to inspect some horses for the Prince of Wales, and the press was referring to noble lords implicated in the trial. Newlove and Veck pleaded guilty to indecency on the 18th of September, and the judge, Sir Thomas Chambers, a former Liberal Member of Parliament who had a reputation for leniency, sentenced them to 4 and 9 months' hard labour respectively. Their sentences were considered at the time not to be too harsh. Hammond escaped to France, but the French authorities expelled him after pressure from the British government, and he hastily moved on to Belgium, from where he emigrated to the United States. Newton, acting for Somerset, paid for Hammond's ticket. On the advice of the Prime Minister, Lord Salisbury, no extradition proceedings were attempted, and the case against Hammond was quietly dropped. Somerset returned to Britain in late September to attend the horse sales at Newmarket, but suddenly left for Dieppe on the 26th, probably after being told by Newton that he was in danger of being arrested. He returned again in September, as his grandmother, Emily Somerset, the Dowager Duchess of Beaufort, had died, and he attended her funeral. The Assistant Treasury Solicitor and the Commissioner of Police pressed for action to be taken against Somerset, but the Lord Chancellor, Lord Halsbury, blocked any prosecution. Rumours of Somerset's involvement were circulating, and on the 19th of October he fled back to France. Lord Salisbury was later accused of warning Somerset through Sir Dighton Probyn, who had met Lord Salisbury the evening before, that a warrant for his arrest was imminent. This was denied by Salisbury and the Attorney General Sir Richard Webster. Probyn's informant may have been the Assistant Commissioner of Police, Richard Pearson. The Prince of Wales wrote to Salisbury, expressing satisfaction that Somerset had been allowed to leave the country, and asking that if he should ever dare to show his face in England again, he would remain unmolested by the authorities. But Lord Salisbury was also being pressured by the police to prosecute Somerset. In November, a warrant for his arrest was finally issued. By this time, he was already safely abroad, and the warrant caught little public attention. After an unsuccessful search for employment in Turkey and Austria-Hungary, Somerset settled down to live anonymously in France, at first in Paris, and then on the French Riviera. Other names mentioned by the press were Lord Ronald Gower and Lord Errol. Also implicated was the prominent social figure, Alexander Broadley, who fled abroad for 4 years. In December, it was reported that both the Prince and Princess of Wales were being daily assailed with anonymous letters of the most outrageous character concerning the scandal. By January 1890, 60 suspects had been identified, 22 of whom had already left the country. Despite the attempt at a cover-up, American newspapers claimed that Prince Albert was somehow mixed up in the scandal. Because the press initially barely covered the story, the affair would have faded quickly from public memory, if not for journalist Ernest Park, who was the editor of the obscure politically radical weekly, the North London Press. Park got wind of the affair when one of his reporters brought him the story of Newlove's conviction. Park began to question why the male prostitutes had been given such light sentences relative to their offence. The usual penalty for gross indecency was 2 years at the time, and how Hammond had been able to evade arrest. His curiosity aroused, Park found out the boys had named prominent aristocrats. He subsequently ran a story on the 28th of September, hinting at their involvement, but without detailing specific names. On the 16th of November, he published a follow-up story specifically naming Henry Fitzroy, Earl of Euston, and his connection with an indescribably loathsome scandal in Cleveland Street. He further alleged that Euston may have gone to Peru, and that he had been allowed to escape to cover up the involvement of a more highly placed person, who was not named, but was believed by some to be Prince Albert Victor, the son of the Prince of Wales. Euston was in fact still in England, and immediately filed a case against Park for libel. At the trial, Euston admitted that when walking along Piccadilly, a tout had given him a card which read, "Poses Plastique. C. Hammond, 19 Cleveland Street." Euston testified that he went to the house believing Poses Plastique meant a display of female nudes. He paid a sovereign to get in, but on entering he was appalled to discover the improper nature of the place and immediately left. The defence witnesses contradicted each other and could not describe Euston accurately. The final defence witness, John Saul, was a male prostitute who had earlier been involved in a homosexual scandal at Dublin Castle and featured in a clandestinely published erotic novel, The Sins of the Cities of the Plain, which was cast as his autobiography. Delivering his testimony in a manner described as brazen effrontery, Saul admitted to earning his living by leading an immoral life and practising criminality, and detailed his alleged sexual encounters with Euston at the house. The defence did not call either Newlove or Beck as witnesses, and could not produce any evidence that Euston had left the country. On the 16th of January 1890, the jury found Park guilty, and he was sentenced to 12 months in prison. Some people thought that Euston was telling the truth, and only visited Cleveland Street once because he was misled by the card. Others have alleged he was a well-known figure in the homosexual underworld. Saul stated that he had told the police his story in August, which provoked the judge to inquire why the authorities had not taken action sooner. While Park's conviction cleared Euston, another trial began on the 16th of December, when Newlove's and Somerset's solicitor, Arthur Newton, was charged with obstruction of justice. It was alleged that he conspired to prevent Hammond and the boys from testifying by offering or giving them tickets and money to go abroad and keep a low profile. Newton was defended by Charles Russell, who had prosecuted Ernest Park, and the prosecutor was Sir Richard Webster, the Attorney General. Newton pleaded guilty to one of the 6 charges against him, claiming that he had assisted Hammond to flee merely to protect his clients, who were not at the time charged with any offence or under arrest, from political blackmail. The Attorney General accepted Newton's pleas, and did not present any evidence on the other 5 charges. On the 20th of May, the judge sentenced Newton to 6 weeks in prison, which was widely considered by members of the legal profession to be harsh. A petition signed by 250 London lawyers was sent to the Home Secretary, protesting at Newton's treatment. During Newton's trial, a motion in Parliament sought to investigate Park's allegations of a cover-up. Henry Labouchere, a member of Parliament from the radical wing of the Liberal Party, was staunchly against homosexuality and had campaigned successfully to add the Gross Indecency Amendment to the Criminal Law Act. He was convinced that the conspiracy to cover up the scandal went further up the government than assumed. Labouchere made his suspicions known in Parliament in February 1890. He denied that a gentleman of very high position, presumably Prince Albert Victor, was in any way involved in the scandal, but accused the government of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. He suggested that the Prime Minister, Lord Salisbury, and other officials colluded to hamper the investigation, allowing Somerset and Hammond to escape, delaying the trials and failing to prosecute the case with vigour. His accusations were denied by the Attorney General, Sir Richard Webster, who was also the prosecutor in the Newton case. Charles Russell, who had prosecuted Park and was defending Newton, sat on the Liberal benches with Labouchere, but refused to be drawn into the discussion, after an often passionate debate over 7 hours, during which Labouchere was expelled from Parliament after saying, "I do not believe Lord Salisbury," and refusing to withdraw his remark. The motion was defeated by a wide margin, 206 to 66. In a subsequent speech in the House of Lords, Salisbury eventually admitted that from his memory, his handling of the affair was defective. Public interest in the scandal eventually faded from view. Newspaper coverage reinforced negative attitudes about male homosexuality as an aristocratic vice, presenting the telegraph boys as corrupted and exploited by members of the upper class. That attitude reached its height a few years later, when Oscar Wilde was tried for gross indecency as a result of his affair with Lord Alfred Douglas. Prince Albert Victor died in 1892, but society gossip about his sex life continued. 60 years after the scandal, the official biographer of King George V, Harold Nicholson, was told by Lord Goddard, who was a 12-year-old schoolboy at the time of the scandal, that Prince Albert Victor had been involved in the male brothel scene, and that a solicitor had to commit perjury to clear him. The solicitor was struck off for his offence, but was thereafter reinstated. In fact, none of the lawyers involved in the case were convicted of perjury or struck off at the time, and most had very distinguished careers. But Arthur Newton was struck off by the Law Society for 12 months for professional misconduct in 1910, after falsifying letters from another of his clients, the notorious murderer Dr. Hawley Crippen. In 1913, he was struck off again, this time indefinitely, and sentenced to 3 years' imprisonment for obtaining money by false pretences. Newton may have invented and spread the rumours about Prince Albert Victor in an attempt to protect his clients from prosecution by forcing a cover-up. In 1902, an American newspaper alleged that Lord Somerset, having learned in some way that 19 Cleveland Street was under police surveillance and that he may have been identified as a visitor, it was contrived by Somerset to bring the prince to the house on an innocent pretext in the hope that the police, seeing him cross the threshold, would be afraid to take the case any further. The report alleged the ruse Somerset used was the prince's fondness for boule furniture, a type of intricate French cabinet making. He invited him to inspect a Bull cabinet, which was in the house, and the prince remained there for no more than 5 minutes. The warrant for Somerset's arrest remained open, and he never returned to England. For more than 30 years he lived in self-imposed exile, until his death in 1926. The house at 19 Cleveland Street no longer survives, as it was demolished in the 1890s for an extension to Marylebone Hospital.